Single mom bought the ranch for $700, just dirt, silence, and a broken fence line. But what she didn't know was that beneath her feet lay a secret powerful enough to change her life. One mother, one chance, one discovery worth $1 billion. Stay to the end. This story doesn't just surprise you, it knocks the wind out of you. Stick around. This story will change the way you see ordinary people forever. Before we begin, if stories of quiet courage, unexpected love, and everyday miracles speak to your heart, consider subscribing. One click helps us bring more of these true-to-life inspirations into the world, and we're so grateful to have you with us. Now, let's begin. The courthouse smelled like dust and coffee. Not fresh brewed, but the stale kind that sits in the back of a room for too long, forgotten and bitter. Claire Maddox adjusted her flannel collar, eyes fixed on the faded auction flyer pinned to the bulletin board. It was yellowed, the corners curling like it had given up weeks ago, but one line still stood out in bold. Parcel number 43, Widow's Ridge Ranch, starting bid $700. A snort came from behind her. Place is cursed, someone muttered, not even bothering to lower their voice. Ain't had water since Carter was president. Claire didn't turn. She didn't need to. That voice, the casual cruelty wrapped in southern drawl, was one she'd heard her whole life, the kind that said more with a chuckle than a threat ever could. She gripped the folded envelope in her coat pocket, divorce papers, still warm from the printer. Her ex-husband's signature stared back at her when she glanced earlier, bold and careless, just like the man himself. Next, the clerk barked from behind the chipped oak counter. His reading glasses sat crooked on his nose. Claire stepped forward. "I'm here for parcel number 43, she said, voice steady. The clerk looked over his glasses, then down at his list. He squinted. "Widow's Ridge?" he chuckled. "Haven't had a bidder on that place in 15 years. You sure you want that mess?" Claire gave a single nod. "Yes, sir." He scratched his head, picked up a red stamp, and slammed it down on a form. "Well, that's the easiest auction I've seen in a while. Ain't no one else dumb enough to raise a paddle on that one." "Why's it called Widow's Ridge?" she asked. A man in a feed store cap behind her piped up. "'Cause the last woman who lived there buried 2 husbands and a son before the well dried up. Place never recovered. Folks say the land quit on her like it lost the will to live." The clerk laughed. "Probably a clerical error putting it on the list. Hell, we were going to tear the sign off last spring." Claire didn't laugh. She just pulled out the crumpled bills, severance money from her last job, what was left after paying her sister for babysitting, and a roll of tens she kept in the glove box for emergencies. It all added up to $706. She handed it over without blinking. In the parking lot, her kids waited in the back seat of her dented Chevy Trailblazer. Eli, 11, played a video game with the volume off. Sadie, 8, leaned against the window, drawing invisible pictures with her finger on the fogged glass. Claire slid behind the wheel, started the ignition, and stared out at the 2-lane road that stretched west like a challenge. "You buy it?" Eli asked without looking up. "I did." Sadie sat up. "What's it like?" "Don't know yet." Eli frowned. "Then why'd you get it?" Claire didn't answer right away. The truck rumbled beneath them, old but still faithful. She looked at the horizon, at the line where the gray sky met dry earth. "Because it's mine now," she said finally, "and because it can't be worse than where we came from." They drove west for 4 hours. Towns got smaller, gas stations got rustier, cell service disappeared, and just when Claire thought maybe the road itself would vanish into the prairie, a wooden sign appeared, half buried in weeds. Widow's Ridge, established 1884. The letters were faded, carved by hand. One plank had fallen off and lay beside a tumbleweed. Claire turned onto the gravel path, tires crunching over loose stone. Dust rose behind them like a ghost. The ranch came into view slowly, as if the land was reluctant to reveal its secrets. The house was 2 stories, sagging slightly to the left, like it had a bad hip. One shutter hung by a single nail. The porch steps were sun-bleached and cracked, and a screen door slapped lazily in the wind. Beyond the house, fields stretched out in all directions, brown, brittle, and silent. No other homes in sight, no neighbors, just dirt, fences, and the hush of forgotten things. Sadie peered out. "It looks tired." Claire smiled faintly. "So do I." Inside, the house smelled like thyme, old books, dried mud, and something faintly sweet and rotten. Cobwebs stretched across the corners like they'd claimed the space as their own. Eli opened a hallway closet and jumped back. "There's a bird skeleton in here." Claire laughed. Really laughed. For the first time in months. "Better than a raccoon." They moved slowly, each room revealing some mixture of decay and charm. A cast iron stove in the kitchen, a rocking chair by a fireplace filled with ash. In the upstairs bedroom, a lace curtain fluttered in a broken window, even though there was no breeze. Eli walked into the room next to it and called out, "There's a doll just sitting on the windowsill, watching." Claire sighed, "Then don't touch it." By sunset, they had set up sleeping bags in the living room. No running water yet, no working fridge. Just 3 humans, 1 flashlight, and a box of dry cereal. Claire sat on the front steps, a blanket around her shoulders. The wind had picked up, rustling through the brittle grass like whispers. She thought of her old life, of the apartment with thin walls, of the arguments that never really ended, of working night shifts and waking up to unpaid bills. This place was a mess, a haunted, broken, collapsing mess. But it was theirs, and maybe, just maybe, if they treated it right, it might give something back. Behind her, the floor creaked. Sadie tiptoed out with her blanket and climbed into Claire's lap. "You okay, Mama?" Claire nodded. "Yeah, baby, just thinking." Sadie looked up at the sky. "There's so many stars." Claire kissed the top of her head. "Get some rest," she said softly. "Tomorrow, we start making it ours." The next morning arrived on a gust of dry wind and the unmistakable scent of scorched cedar. Out here, mornings didn't bloom. They dragged themselves in through broken shutters and dust-caked windows. Claire stretched on the creaky living room floor, her back protesting every movement like it had signed up for a better life than this. The kids were still asleep, curled under thrift store quilts, breathing softly. A patch of sun slid across the hardwood floor, illuminating the fine layer of dust that clung to everything like memory. Claire sat up, rubbed her eyes, and listened. Silence, not the peaceful kind, the kind that felt like something was waiting. She stepped outside with a steaming mug of instant coffee and looked across the yard. The land was a strange mix of stillness and tension. The grass barely moved, yet the air felt charged. The barn, what was left of it, leaned forward like it had been caught mid-fall decades ago and just never finished. One of the gates hung open, swaying gently though there was no breeze. And then she saw him, a man, older, late 70s, maybe more, sitting on the edge of the front porch in a rocking chair that hadn't been there the day before. He wore a sun-bleached hat, dusty jeans, and a plaid shirt that had once been blue. His face was leathered by time, but his eyes were alert, too alert for a man just passing by. Claire froze mid-step. "Morning," he called out before she could say anything. Good morning," she replied slowly, glancing toward the door. "Can I help you?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "No, ma'am. I just came to see who was foolish enough to take the ridge off the county's hands." "I'm Claire Maddox. Bought it yesterday." The old man nodded like he already knew. "Saw the truck come in last night. Wasn't sure if y'all would stay past sundown." Claire managed a stiff smile. "Well, here we are." He leaned back in the chair, letting it creak beneath him. "Name's Amos Dunn. Used to own this land a long while back, before things went quiet." Claire frowned. "Quiet?" He pointed a bony finger at the ground. "The ridge. It hums sometimes. Folks don't hear it unless they're real still, like the earth's got something to say but knows better than to speak too loud." She opened her mouth to respond, but Amos was already pushing himself up from the chair. "Just stopped by to look, not to meddle. You seem decent enough. Just don't dig too deep." And with that, he walked down the gravel path and vanished behind the barn like a ghost that knew its way home. Later that afternoon, while Eli helped stack firewood and Sadie drew in the dirt with a stick, Claire tackled the inside of the barn, or what was left of it. The place smelled like old hay and dried animal sweat. Rusted tools hung from nails. The roof let in sunlight through warped slats, casting long golden beams like a cathedral built from neglect. She cleared out a corner, tossing aside a stack of half-rotted boards. As she dragged out an old oil drum, something clanged beneath her feet. Claire froze. She knelt, brushed away a layer of straw, and found a metallic edge jutting from the ground. It wasn't a rock. It wasn't natural. It was a hatch, round, iron, with a bolted wheel on top. Before she could do more, Eli ran in. "Mom, come see this." He led her out behind the barn to where the grass grew unevenly in a sunken patch of earth. There, half buried under dirt and dead brush, was another hatch, smaller, rectangular, with the remnants of warning paint barely visible. Claire looked from it to her son. "Did you open it?" He shook his head. "It's sealed shut, won't budge." She knelt down and ran her fingers along the rusted edge, cold even in the sun. Strange. Sadie wandered over, eyes wide. "What is it?" "I don't know," Claire said softly. "Probably nothing." But even as she said it, she didn't believe it. That night, after the kids were asleep, Claire sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and a flashlight. She made a list. Fix kitchen faucet, check fuse box, get water running, figure out hatch thing. The wind rattled the back door, and the floor creaked as if someone, or something, was pacing in the hallway upstairs. She told herself it was just old wood settling, just wind and time. But then the floor vibrated. Not much, barely enough to register, like a heartbeat under her feet. A pulse, a thrum. Claire stilled. There it was again. 3 beats, then gone. The next morning, Eli asked, "Did you feel that last night?" Claire hesitated. "Feel what?" "I don't know, like the ground moved, just a little." Sadie chimed in. "I thought it was a train, but there aren't any trains out here." Claire forced a smile. "Just the house adjusting. It's old." But her eyes drifted toward the barn, and the hatch half swallowed by dirt and time. She didn't say it aloud, but something had shifted. This place wasn't just tired, it was waiting. Morning crept over Widow's Ridge like an apology, throwing soft, colorless light over brittle weeds and rusted hinges. Claire stood barefoot on the warped kitchen floor, staring at the faucet as it coughed up more air than water. She twisted the handle twice, watched the pipes shudder, and listened to the silence that followed. It had been 3 days since they'd moved in, and the house remained defiant in its brokenness. The well had dried up long ago. Everyone in town had said so. Still, she tried every morning, like hope was something that might leak back in overnight, if given the chance. Outside, the wind scattered dry leaves across the porch, and a vulture circled low over the western slope. Claire stepped out, breathing in the dry air, her eyes moving across the land with a mixture of fatigue and defiance. The soil cracked beneath her boots. The earth had gone brittle with neglect, like a conversation left unanswered for too many years. She spent the morning clearing brush near the fence line. Thorny mesquite scratched her arms as she hauled out old lumber and barbed wire. Her hands ached from gripping too tight, but she welcomed the sting. Sweat poured freely in the mid-October heat. In the distance, the barn leaned a little farther west, as if slowly resigning itself to gravity. Claire had no grand plan, just a shovel, a toolbox, and the resolve not to leave. Inside, Sadie braided ribbons into her doll's hair, while Eli hovered near the back window, watching the barn, watching the dirt, watching something. At noon, Claire tried the fuse box again. Half the circuits didn't respond. The ceiling fan in the living room creaked into motion, then sputtered and died. She muttered under her breath, then carried a wrench and flashlight down into the crawl space, where spiders lived fat and undisturbed. Everything was patched. Everything was jury-rigged. Nothing was sound. Still, she moved through each task like it was a test she refused to fail. By the third afternoon, the children returned from school in silence. Their shoulders slumped, their lunchboxes untouched. She didn't ask. She already knew. Small towns didn't take kindly to outsiders, especially not those who came from nothing and dared to stake a claim on something people thought should remain forgotten. Whispers traveled faster than tumbleweed. She'd felt it at the grocery store, eyes that lingered too long, smiles that didn't reach past the mouth. At night, while her children slept, Claire sat on the back steps with a lukewarm beer and a flashlight, listening again for the thrum. Nothing, only wind and the far-off howl of a coyote. But she felt it in her bones, the quiet beneath the silence. The land was holding something back. The next morning, a knock came at the door. Claire opened it to find a man in a suede jacket and pressed jeans. He introduced himself as Aaron Fisher, assistant manager at the local bank. His tone was courteous, the kind that sounded like a smile but left no warmth behind. He mentioned financing, hinted at burden, offered a small check, just in case the place gets too much to manage. She closed the door before he finished the sentence. Later that day, Eli approached her in the backyard. His sneakers were caked in dust, and his shirt stuck to his back. He said nothing, only pointed toward the back of the barn. Claire followed him. There, under a patch of weeds and warped fence posts, the boy had uncovered the same metal hatch she had seen on the first day, the one she had half forgotten, half feared. This time, it wasn't just visible, it had been cleared. Eli had spent the morning digging, methodically scraping away layers of packed earth until the full perimeter of the hatch was exposed. A rusted wheel sat at its center, locked in place by corrosion and time. Claire knelt, brushed her fingers over the surface. The metal was cold, unnaturally so. She pressed her ear against it. Nothing. But still, she sensed something waiting on the other side. They fetched tools from the shed, crowbars, hammers, oil. The hatch didn't yield easily. Its bolts had fused with age. Each strike of the hammer sent shivers through her arms and shoulders. The metal vibrated in a way that felt wrong. Not loose, alive. After over an hour of work, the wheel finally creaked a fraction of a turn. Eli stared at her, waiting. She stared back, hesitant. They didn't open it. Not yet. But the air changed, the wind shifted, and that night, for the first time, Claire dreamed. In her sleep, she saw the ranch as it might have been, green, wide, humming with energy. Men in coveralls worked under floodlights, shouting across the fields as drills pushed into the earth. In the distance, a man in a dark suit stood on the barn's roof, hands clasped behind his back, unmoving. Claire woke in a sweat. Outside, coyotes howled, and beneath the floorboards, something knocked. Once, then again. She didn't tell the kids. Instead, she focused on chores, scrubbed the hallway walls, repaired a broken step, took apart the kitchen sink, and rebuilt it from pieces no one had labeled. She tried to keep her hands busy and her thoughts shallow, but it didn't last. On the fifth day, while cutting through thick brush on the eastern edge of the property, her shovel struck something solid. She dropped to her knees and began digging with both hands, dirt flying in frantic bursts. It was another hatch, smaller, rounder, painted black. The paint had peeled in long streaks, revealing dull iron beneath. The words stenciled across the top had nearly worn away, but she could just make out the letters D17, permit required. She sat back, heart pounding. This land wasn't abandoned, it had been buried. That night, she laid the kids down early and returned to the first hatch with a lantern and a socket wrench. She worked slowly, unscrewing bolts, ignoring the ache in her wrists and the dirt in her fingernails. By midnight, the hatch groaned open half an inch. The smell that rose up was not rot, not earth, not oil. It was chemical, sharp, metallic, like ozone and rust, and something faintly sweet. She closed it again and sat beside it, back against the barn wall, listening. But the ground had gone still again, like it knew she was listening. Claire walked back to the house under a sky full of stars, more visible than she'd ever seen in the city. The silence felt heavier now, not empty, but full of something just beyond reach. She stood at the threshold of the porch, staring out into the endless prairie. Behind her, the old floorboards creaked again. She turned quickly, half expecting to see one of the kids awake. Nothing. But a cold draft slipped through the room as if someone had opened a door that wasn't there before. The sky over Widow's Ridge had turned a dull steel gray by mid-morning, thick clouds hanging low, like they'd been nailed into place and forgotten. It wasn't the kind of day that promised rain, just one that made the horizon feel heavier. Claire stood at the sink, twisting the faucet again, still dry, still nothing, only the groan of old pipes mocking her with their emptiness. She had spent most of the past 2 days cataloging broken things, a roof that leaked even when it wasn't raining, outlets that sparked when used, a stove that wouldn't hold a flame, and beneath it all, the land. The land itself seemed to hum with secrets, not loudly, but like a whisper caught behind the teeth of something bigger. Out back, the hatches remained untouched since the night she pried one open, just enough to smell what hid below. She had closed it, tight, bolted it back down. And yet, every morning, she walked by to check it again, just to be sure. That's when the black SUV arrived. No dust trail announced it, no engine growl warned her. It simply appeared, parked just inside the main gate, like it had been there all along. Claire stepped off the porch slowly, arms crossed, her jaw tight. She hadn't called anyone, hadn't told a soul about the hatch, the dream, the stenciled lid marked D17. And yet, here it was, sleek, tinted, spotless. It didn't belong. The driver's door opened with a soft, mechanical sound. A man stepped out, tall, thin, impeccably dressed, in a tailored navy suit that looked absurd against the backdrop of rusted fence wire and cow dung. His shoes didn't even scuff the dirt. "Claire Maddox?" he asked, voice low and deliberate. She didn't answer immediately. The man looked like he'd stepped out of a courtroom or a war room, not a ranch. "Depends," she said. He smiled, polite but unreadable. "My name is Mr. Holden. I represent an organization called Blackstone Energy." He didn't extend a hand, didn't ask permission. He simply walked past her, taking in the land like a man appraising property already signed over. Claire followed. He stopped near the barn, his gaze settling just a little too long on the ground beyond the structure, the area near the main hatch. She felt her pulse quicken. "Strange choice of land," he said. "This parcel was pulled from development proposals decades ago, abandoned, even by oil surveyors." "I guess I like underdogs," Claire replied flatly. Holden turned to face her. "Are you planning to excavate any part of the western slope?" Her throat tightened. The question was too specific, too pointed. She lied. "No." A pause. He smiled again, slightly, just enough to unsettle. "Good," he said. "We simply like to stay informed. Sometimes old maps don't stay buried the way they should." He pulled a card from his breast pocket, black, thick, with silver embossed letters. No number, no website, just a name, Blackstone. He handed it to her like it was both a warning and a test. Then he left, didn't shake hands, didn't look back, just stepped into the SUV and was gone. No dust, no tire marks, like he'd vanished into the very stillness he came from. That night, Claire stood in the attic, flashlight in one hand, her other brushing through decades of forgotten things. Boxes of rotted books, old quilts, a child's metal lunchbox from the 1960s. The wind hissed against the eaves. Somewhere beneath the floorboards, Sadie coughed in her sleep. She found the map in an old trunk beneath moth-eaten blankets. At first, it looked like a waterline survey, but the paper was thick, textured, printed in ink that had faded unevenly with age. She smoothed it on the attic floor. There it was, a detailed layout of the ridge, dated 1948, with surveyor stamps, topography lines, and black outline sections marked with red ink. In 2 areas, including the land where her son had uncovered the first hatch, a thick stamp bled across the paper. Void, do not drill. Another mark, U.S. Gov'd, Special Hold 17. Claire stared at it, heart pounding. These weren't just water maps, they were warnings. She took the map to the only person she could think of, James Rivas, the older man who mopped floors at the diner, the one who always smelled faintly of diesel and coffee grounds. A retired oil driller with too many scars on his hands to fake his history. They sat in the back lot of the diner in folding chairs, the map spread across the hood of his pickup. He didn't say a word for a long time, just traced the lines with one cracked fingertip. "Where'd you find this?" he asked eventually. "In my attic." He gave a low whistle. I haven't seen Blackstone maps in 20 years. Thought they pulled out of Texas for good. Claire told him about the hatch, about the chemical smell, about Mr. Holden. James listened, silent. When she finished, he leaned back, lit a cigarette, and stared at the sky for a while before finally speaking. You may have bought more than you bargained for. Claire drove home after dark. The kids were asleep. The house was quiet, too quiet. She locked every door, shut every window, placed the map in a plastic sleeve, and hid it in the cupboard behind the flour bin. Outside, the barn creaked in the wind. She watched the fields, eyes scanning the shadows, waiting for another black SUV, another visit, another warning, but none came. Instead, there was only silence, and under that, something deeper, a presence, the kind of stillness that doesn't settle, the kind that holds its breath. The ridge was silent again, but not in the ordinary way silence fills an empty place. It wasn't absence, it was suppression, like something underneath the land had chosen to still itself just long enough to lull its observer back into forgetting. Claire didn't forget. The hatch, the visit from Holden, the red-stamped survey map, none of it faded. It lived in the corners of her thoughts now, always at the edge of attention, like the hum of a machine behind a locked door. She carried the weight of it each day, moving through the broken routines of the ranch, like a woman chasing normalcy in a place that no longer had any use for it. James Rivas arrived the next morning in a beat-up Dodge that looked older than the barn. He stepped out with a slow, deliberate grace, like every joint had learned to obey a man who'd spent decades demanding more from his body than it wanted to give. The wind pressed the brim of his oil-stained cap against his forehead. He carried with him a canvas satchel, a crowbar, and a rusted core drill, strapped to the bed of the truck. Claire met him without a word. They didn't need much. He was a man who understood when something was wrong, and she was a woman who had run out of explanations. They walked the western slope just before noon, the sun already cruel overhead. James knelt beside the main hatch, studied the soil, ran it between his fingers. Then he turned his attention to a cracked seam in the ground, a faint line of uneven pressure that curved outwards from the barn like a scar beneath the earth. Claire watched him trace the land, like a blind man reading a familiar sentence carved into a wall. He stood, nodded once. Dig there. They didn't need permission. Claire fetched a spade while James retrieved the handheld auger from his truck. Together they worked in silence. The auger spun slowly at first, boring into the sun-baked crust. Sweat rolled from James' temple, darkening the collar of his shirt. Claire steadied the tool, her muscles aching from days of labor. Then the drill changed pitch, a subtle shift, like the auger had passed through something it wasn't meant to. James stopped, pulled it back. Thick, black fluid clung to the bit. It wasn't water. It wasn't mud. It was crude. Claire took a step back. Her breath caught in her chest. James didn't speak for several seconds. Then he reached into his satchel and pulled out a metal sampling tube. He inserted it into the borehole, slowly, carefully, then capped it tight. When he looked at her, his expression was unreadable. "This isn't surface seepage," he said at last. "This is formation oil, pressurized, trapped." Claire blinked. "So, there's a reservoir under the land?" He nodded. "Not just that, it's untouched. This type of deposit, it shouldn't be here. Not this high, not this close to the crust." She swallowed. "And that means?" "It means," he said slowly, "you're sitting on something worth a hell of a lot of money, and a hell of a lot of trouble." The ranch felt different after that. Not visually, nothing moved. The wind still swept dust across the porch, the screen door still creaked on its hinge, and the barn still leaned like a drunk too proud to fall. But the air carried a new weight, as if the land itself was aware that it had been discovered. Claire paced the hallway that evening, hands coated in oil and soil, trying to reconcile what she had seen with what it meant. She didn't want to believe in curses, but it wasn't hard to believe in men who would do anything to hide a billion-dollar secret. James stayed long after sunset. They sat on the porch while Eli and Sadie played cards under a lantern inside. James had been in oil his whole life. He'd seen fields dry up overnight and watched corporations throw lawsuits like grenades to delay competition. But this was different. This deposit, he said, voice low, was mapped, surveyed, and buried. Someone decided the world shouldn't know it was here. Claire stared at the horizon, her mind running faster than she could hold on to. Why? James shrugged. Could have been government, could have been private contracts, could have been defense. She turned. Defense? He nodded, slow. Some formations aren't just oil. They're laced with trace chemicals, rare elements, stuff that doesn't belong this close to the surface unless someone was experimenting. The idea felt too large, too insane. And yet, so did a billion-dollar oil reservoir under a decaying ranch house bought for $700. Later that night, while Claire washed the sampling tube in the sink, Sadie wandered into the kitchen, barefoot, clutching a torn doll. She paused at the doorway. "Mama?" Claire turned. "Yes, sweetheart." Sadie's eyes were wide, confused. "I saw that man again." Claire dried her hands. "What man?" "The one in the rocking chair. He was standing by the barn. He was just staring." Claire moved fast. Too fast. By the time she got outside, the field was empty, only wind and grass and stars. But something on the porch caught her eye. An old Bible, water-stained, bound in cracked leather. It hadn't been there before. Inside the front cover, in faded ink, property of W.R. Dunn. She brought it inside, hands trembling slightly. The pages were fragile, browned from age and weather. Pressed between Genesis and Exodus was an old black-and-white photo. 3 men in suits, standing in front of the barn. One was unmistakably Amos Dunn, the old man who'd warned her not to dig. Another looked like a military officer, wearing insignia Claire didn't recognize. The third had no face. It had been scratched out with something sharp. Claire turned the photo over. A single word was scrawled on the back, in handwriting that shook with age. Witness. She closed the book, set it aside, and for the first time since arriving at the ridge, she locked every door in the house. Sleep didn't come easy. Claire lay in bed, watching moonlight crawl across the ceiling. The house creaked. The wind whistled through cracked windows. Somewhere below, she thought she heard movement, but told herself it was just mice, or the wind, or the pressure of too many thoughts. But deep beneath the floorboards, the ground thrummed again, once, twice, then silence. Like a warning, or a heartbeat. The temperature dropped overnight, not enough to warrant a coat, but just enough for the cold to sneak into the bones of the house. Claire stood in the kitchen at 5:03 a.m., barefoot on the cracked tile, mug of coffee in hand, listening. The hum hadn't returned. That vibration from below, the pulse, the thrum, it had gone silent again. But the silence no longer felt like mercy. It felt strategic, as if the land knew it had been seen. The photo of Amos Dunn and the faceless men sat beside the stove, half hidden under a dish rag. She hadn't shown the children. There was no point. They were already beginning to feel the pressure of things they couldn't name. Sadie had woken crying the night before. She said she'd heard a whisper coming from the bathroom sink, like voices moving through the pipes. Claire had checked, of course, found nothing. Still, she left the hallway light on. The sound of tires crunching gravel drew her attention now. She looked through the front window, just in time to catch the flash of dark headlights as a black SUV reversed from the front gate and slipped back onto the highway. No one had knocked. No one had called out. They just watched. By mid-morning, the air had turned dry and brittle, as if whatever tension had settled over the land was beginning to change the weather itself. Claire drove into town to pick up more bottled water and canned goods. She walked through the grocery store like a woman being shadowed, aware that too many eyes lingered too long, that conversations paused when she stepped into an aisle. The cashier didn't say a word as she checked out, just handed her the receipt and nodded once. Claire was already halfway to the door when she realized the receipt was blank. No price, no total, just a scribbled note at the bottom. Don't trust anyone near the bank. Back at the ranch, she found her job at the diner had been put on hold. The manager, who had once smiled and called her Han, now wouldn't meet her eyes. He handed her a brown envelope with her final paycheck and mumbled something about rumors and concerns for safety. No one had spoken a threat aloud, but it hung in the air like smoke. James called later that evening. His voice was lower than usual, tired and cautious. "They came by my house," he said. "Didn't knock, just parked outside for a while. A man and a woman, both in black. She had a tablet, he had a briefcase. Just sat there, staring through the windshield." Claire pressed the phone tighter to her ear. "They know what we found, Claire," he said, "and they're not happy we touched it." That night, it happened again. The vibrations returned, but only for a moment. Claire had been walking down the hallway, about to switch off the last light, when the floor beneath her shifted, not violently, just a tremble, like something very large had turned over beneath the house. Then came the whisper. It wasn't in her ears. It was in her bones. It passed through her like an electric current, too faint to shock, but too sharp to ignore. She stopped breathing for a moment, just listened. The plumbing in the bathroom clicked twice. The kitchen faucet groaned, and then absolute stillness. She waited for it to happen again. It didn't. The next morning, a small package arrived in the mailbox. No return address, just her name printed neatly on the label. Claire opened it slowly, standing in the driveway with the wind swirling dust around her ankles. Inside was a USB stick and a single sheet of paper. This is what they buried. No explanation. She drove into town and borrowed a laptop from James. They sat together at the diner's back office. Door locked, blinds drawn. Claire inserted the USB and clicked open the single video file. It was grainy, time-stamped March 4th, 1982, labeled OP Desert Glass. The footage was black and white, recorded from what looked like a helmet-mounted camera. Military trucks parked in front of the barn. Men in hazmat suits moving crates into a large concrete vault built under the foundation. One man held a Geiger counter. Another carried a clipboard with the Blackstone insignia printed in the corner. Then came the most disturbing part. They sealed the vault, welded the doors shut, and poured concrete over it. A voice, possibly the commanding officer, spoke to the camera. "No one goes back in. Not unless DC says otherwise. Tell the locals it's an abandoned oil test site." Then static. Claire leaned back in her chair, heart pounding. James didn't say a word. He just shook his head slowly and whispered, "Jesus." They didn't know who had sent the footage, or why, but the message was clear. This wasn't just about oil. It never had been. This was federal containment, classified, long forgotten, and quietly erased. Back at the ranch, Claire opened the hatch again. This time, she held a flashlight. She lowered it slowly, careful not to make a sound. The beam illuminated the metal tunnel, lined with steel, reinforced, and leading into darkness. There were markings on the walls, numbers, symbols, red paint, and something else. An old camera lens, bolted into the wall, pointed upward. It blinked once, a single red light, then died. She closed the hatch, bolted it shut again, and sat on the porch for over an hour, watching the road. That night, the black SUV didn't stop at the gate. It came onto the property, headlights off, moving slow. She called James, no answer. She called the sheriff. The line dropped after one ring. The SUV idled for several minutes outside the barn, its engine humming low, almost inaudible. Then it turned around and disappeared into the dust. Claire didn't sleep. She sat on the floor in Sadie's room, holding a hammer in one hand and the Bible in the other, listening for footsteps that never came. Only the pipes whispered. Only the wind scraped the windows. Only her own breath reminded her she was still above ground. The letter arrived by certified courier, folded in a heavy black envelope, sealed in wax, and addressed by name. Miss Claire Maddox. No return address, no phone number, just a clean, minimalist typeface, printed across the top of the letterhead. Blackstone Holdings, Energy Division. Claire read it on the porch, coffee forgotten beside her, fingers stiff from the morning air. The message was sharp and cold, written in legal precision, citing unauthorized access to federally protected subterranean infrastructure and historically redacted intellectual property patents registered under the Energy Resources and Defense Act of 1951. Buried beneath the jargon was the threat. Cease all excavation and exploration activity immediately. Further action will be met with legal enforcement. Claire stared at the signature at the bottom. D.M. Holden, Executive Legal Counsel. She folded the letter slowly, deliberately, and looked out toward the barn. The wind had changed again. She didn't know how she knew it, but she felt it. The ridge had turned inward, quiet, like something bracing for impact. She drove to the county records office the same day. It was housed in a limestone building next to a hardware store, the flagpole out front half-tilted and missing a rope. The woman at the front desk barely looked up as Claire approached. "I'm looking for historical transfer documents related to Parcel 8 BR-Maddox Ranch," Claire said. The clerk narrowed her eyes. "You sure you want to dig into that file?" Claire nodded. "Yes, ma'am." It took 45 minutes and 3 signed forms, but eventually, Claire was led into the back archive room, a cold, fluorescent-lit vault of metal cabinets and dust. A single manila folder marked "Confidential," sealed by Court Order 1987, was slid across the table. Redactions dominated every page, names blacked out, whole paragraphs blacked out. One page listed the transfer of land ownership from a company called Soltech Developments to Maddox Trust, but under grantee, it simply read, "No signature, no date." Another sheet referenced defensive resource containment, classified per Federal Code, Title 49C. Claire didn't know what it meant, but she knew what it implied. This land had once been the property of a ghost corporation, and whatever was underneath had warranted federal silence. She took photos of everything. Back at the ranch, James was waiting with his truck, a concerned look drawn deep into the lines of his face. "You're not going to believe this," Claire began, but James cut her off. "They followed me, Claire." She stopped cold. From the gas station to the feed store and all the way to the post office. Same black SUV, 2 men inside. They didn't speak, didn't step out, just made sure I knew they were there. Claire's breath caught in her throat. "You still want to fight this?" he asked. Claire didn't hesitate. "I want to protect my kids, my name, this land. So, yes, James, I'm not backing down." James sighed and opened the truck's tailgate. Inside was a stack of notarized paperwork and a folder labeled "Mineral Rights, Claim Application." "We'll file a claim, quietly, through a trust name so it can't be traced directly, but we've got to move fast. If Blackstone files before us, we're done." Claire felt the heat rise in her chest. Not fear, resolve. "What do I need to do?" They worked through the night. James had called in his granddaughter, Marley, a third-year law student from Lubbock, who arrived with a backpack full of books and a stare sharp enough to cut glass. She was in her 20s, smart, skeptical, and fiercely committed to exposing corporate corruption. "I've seen Blackstone cases buried so deep, the Supreme Court wouldn't find them," she told Claire, "but I've also seen them lose when people fight smart." They created a shell trust under the name Dust Riverland and Resource LLC, registered in New Mexico. Marley handled the paperwork while Claire provided the land deed, surveyor notations, and James's soil sample documentation as supporting evidence. At 2:14 a.m., they submitted the mineral rights claim electronically to the state office. It was done, but it wasn't over. 3 days later, strange things began to happen. The water pump that Claire and James had repaired burst without warning. The tank had been overpressurized, not from use, but from backflow. James confirmed it wasn't natural. Someone had tampered with it. The barn's tool rack was found tipped over, bolts unscrewed, gear missing. Marley's laptop disappeared from her truck, though nothing else was stolen. A neighbor, the only one within half a mile, stopped returning calls. Then the whispers returned. Not from under the floor, but from inside the walls. Sadie heard them first. She woke screaming, said the voice in the drain pipes had called her name. Eli, trying to stay brave, admitted he'd heard knocking from the bathtub the night before. 4 slow taps, like a code. Claire opened every faucet, unscrewed every drain, but found nothing. Still, the sense of being watched had grown unbearable. On the 5th night after filing the claim, Marley burst into the living room, pale and breathless. "They know," she said. "Blackstone filed a challenge." She opened her laptop and pulled up the state mineral registry. A new entry had been added to the system. Blackstone Holdings. Dispute filed. Fraudulent claim alleged. "They're accusing us of document forgery," Marley said, "and they're doing it in federal jurisdiction. This isn't about the land anymore. They want to make it criminal. Claire stared at the screen. This wasn't just about oil. This was about control, about precedent, about someone in a boardroom refusing to let a single mother with dirt on her boots threaten an empire. Marley leaned forward, voice low. If they win, they'll bury this land again, and us with it. Claire looked around at her children, who had begun to sit quietly these days, their laughter dulled, their eyes wary. She thought of Amos Dunn, of the hatch, of the blinking camera lens, of the chemical scent rising from the earth. She clenched her fists. Then we don't let them win. By the end of the week, the wind on Widow's Ridge began to shift, not just in direction, but in tone. It no longer whispered warnings. It hissed through the broken slats of the barn like a challenge. The land, it seemed, had chosen a side. Claire had not slept more than 3 hours in any given night. Her mind, pulled tight with tension, cycled endlessly through a loop of possibility and danger. Beneath her kitchen floor, a file box now sat encased in concrete under the crawl space. Inside, the photo of Amos Dunn, the Blackstone USB, soil samples, and the deed transfer records she'd pried loose from the county archive. The only way forward was exposure. Quiet resistance hadn't worked. Blackstone had escalated. Now it was time to show the world what was buried here, and Claire would begin with proof. James arrived before sunrise with a borrowed drilling rig, something half legal and entirely unregistered. He backed it carefully through the pasture, wheels churning up dry soil, eyes scanning the perimeter for onlookers. There were none, but they knew better than to trust appearances. We drill one hole, he said. 10 feet, maybe 15, enough to catch the pressure. Claire nodded. And then? We record it, publicly. They chose a new site, 100 yards east of the barn where no visible hatch or scar marred the ground. If Blackstone had the rest of the land mapped, they would never suspect this test location. Marley set up her phone on a tripod, time-stamped and streaming to a cloud drive. Claire stood beside her, clipboard in hand, narrating the process like a field journalist. The auger bit into the dirt. 8 feet, 9, 10. At 12 feet, the drill stuttered. The rig let out a grinding whine. Then came the burst. Crude oil erupted from the borehole like a geyser, thick and black, misting the air with its bitter scent. It rained down over James's gloves, over the earth, over Claire's boots. Marley took 2 steps back, stunned, silent. Claire stared at it, unmoving. It wasn't just oil. It was undeniable proof. Marley stepped forward, wiping her camera lens with the sleeve of her jacket. It's real, she said. It's all real. James capped the pressure and sealed the valve. The ground hissed. Claire leaned over the borehole, staring down at the glistening darkness. This wasn't victory yet, but it was the first blow that Blackstone couldn't ignore. The video went live within hours. Marley posted it anonymously to a handful of oil watch forums, environmental watchdogs, and 2 university geology departments. Within 6 hours, it had been reposted to Reddit and copied onto YouTube under the title, Underground Billion-Dollar Oil Site Hidden by Federal Cover-Up? 12 hours later, Claire received her first media call. By morning, her inbox was overflowing. Independent reporters, college journalists, 3 international energy blogs. A Texas-based investigative podcast offered to come out with equipment in tow. And then, Blackstone responded. A courier arrived with a formal offer, $4 million in exchange for immediate withdrawal of the mineral claim and a permanent non-disclosure agreement signed by all parties. The letter was precise. The envelope smelled faintly of industrial plastic. The tone was eerily polite. Claire read it 3 times, then passed it to Marley. Marley stared, silent. Then she looked up and said flatly, "You can't take this." Claire nodded. "I won't." The day after the rejection, everything accelerated. A black drone began circling the ridge in slow, mechanical loops, pausing at intervals over the barn, the test site, and the house. At night, Claire caught the red glow of its camera through her bedroom window. She closed the curtains but left the lights off. James's front porch was egged by someone he couldn't identify, a warning or a threat. Either way, he nailed boards across his windows and disconnected his landline. Marley's law school email was hacked. Someone posted doctored photos of her on a local message board, attempting to discredit her as an eco-radical. She ignored it. The old way of silencing women no longer worked the way it used to. Claire, meanwhile, stayed focused. Her children were priority number one. She taught them what to do if she wasn't home, how to find Marley, how to call James. She gave them both small burner phones she'd picked up in Laredo. Eli accepted his without question. Sadie asked, "Are we in trouble, Mama?" Claire hugged her tightly and whispered, "No, baby. We're just fighting for what's ours." 2 nights later, the field rig caught fire. James had stored it under a tarp beside the main slope, sealed and disconnected. But sometime between midnight and dawn, accelerant was poured and a flame ignited. The metal buckled in the heat. Tires exploded. $100,000 of equipment reduced to ash. James suffered burns to his arm trying to extinguish the flames. The sheriff, called in by Marley, filed the report but noted, "No visible evidence of arson." Claire didn't argue. She just looked him in the eyes and said, "Then you weren't looking hard enough." By morning, the media storm had started. Marley had leaked the video to a freelance journalist from Austin, a woman named Tanya Greer, who had ties to the Texas Tribune and a sharp instinct for suppressed stories. Tanya arrived with 2 assistants, drones of her own, and a portable studio tent. They filmed everything: the burn site, the borehole, the letter from Blackstone, the photo of Amos Dunn. Claire gave her first on-camera interview wearing an old denim shirt and no makeup, her hair pulled back, her voice unshaken. "This isn't about oil," she said. "It's about truth, about land, about what gets buried and who gets to dig it up." The clip hit social media like a match in dry grass. By nightfall, it had over 2.3 million views. Claire Maddox, single mother of 2, was suddenly a symbol, a living headline. The woman who said no to Blackstone. Some in town supported her, others went silent. A few posted cryptic warnings on Facebook, but the tide had turned. The ridge was no longer forgotten. It was now a battleground. That evening, Claire stood beside the burned rig with Marley and James. The wind had picked up, dry and unrelenting. Smoke still lingered in the air. Claire's voice was quiet. "They wanted us to be afraid." Marley nodded. "Then let's make them nervous instead." James chuckled softly, rubbing the bandage on his arm. "I've seen wildcatters with less fight than you 2. Claire smiled, just faintly, and looked out over the field. The oil still flowed underground. The land still hummed. But for the first time, Claire felt like she was standing with it, not just on it. This wasn't about surviving anymore. It was about claiming, about owning not just the mineral rights, but the narrative. The fire returned at 2:13 a.m., this time not in secret. Claire awoke to a sharp crack, like timber splitting under pressure. Her eyes snapped open, just as the sky outside lit up orange through the blinds. She didn't scream. She moved. She grabbed her boots, shoved them on without socks, and ran. Eli was already in the hallway, barefoot, flashlight in hand, his face as pale as dust. "It's the derrick, Mama." Claire didn't ask how he knew. Sadie stumbled behind him, wrapped in a quilt. Claire pushed both children into the bathroom, locked the door, and told them to stay down and not come out until she said so. Then she sprinted through the front door barefoot, heart pounding hard enough to split her ribs. The derrick stood 100 yards from the barn, a temporary rig James had built from spare steel in sleepless nights. Now it was engulfed in flame, towering higher than the windmill. Metal groaned, oil-fed fire roared as black smoke poured into the cold Texas night. James was already there, fire extinguisher in one hand, a shovel in the other. He swung the shovel wildly, throwing sand toward the base, cursing between coughs. Claire joined him, grabbing the other extinguisher from the side of the barn, and together they attacked the blaze like soldiers in a war neither of them had volunteered for. But it was too late. The structure buckled and collapsed inward, sending sparks skyward in a hiss of twisted steel and melted bolts. James collapsed to one knee, smoke-choked and shaking. Claire dragged him back, coughing, her hands scorched from heat. The fire took the derrick, but it didn't take their will. By morning, the local sheriff stood at the edge of the burn site, arms crossed, chewing the inside of his cheek like he had something to say, but no guts to say it. "No sign of forced entry," he said. "No witnesses. No clear motive. Could be faulty wiring. Claire didn't speak. Could also be wind, he added without meeting her eyes. Dry brush, exposed wiring, accidents happen. Claire stepped forward. No wind last night. He shrugged. Doesn't mean much. She looked him dead in the face. It does to me. The media descended before noon. The video of the fire, taken from a phone by a neighbor across the ridge, had gone viral. The footage was grainy but dramatic. A flaming derrick silhouetted against a full moon, with the caption, "Someone doesn't want her to drill." Reporters swarmed the ranch. Satellite vans rolled in. Claire, still in the same smoke-stained shirt from the night before, stood before a row of microphones and told the truth. "This wasn't an accident," she said. "This was a message, and we heard it, but we're still here." The clip ran on every local affiliate by dinner time. That evening, Marley returned from Austin with an encrypted hard drive and a plan. "I've spoken to 3 attorneys, 2 reporters, and 1 senator's staffer," she said. "They all say the same thing. Keep pressure on them publicly. That's your only real defense." She unpacked a timeline she had been building. Every Blackstone contact, every land transfer, every unexplained incident on the property since 1951. It filled a 12-foot whiteboard, now nailed to the barn wall like a declaration of war. "Once we can tie this fire to Blackstone, we can open a criminal investigation," Marley said. Claire studied the board, eyes lingering on a blurry scan of a 1952 memo that read, "Operation REDDUSK. Suppress, contain, deny." She nodded. "Then we push. Hard." Marley's leak to a freelance journalist had already made waves. Now, Tanya Greer returned with a full camera crew and a feature pitch for 60 minutes. "We want to do a piece on energy secrecy, corporate intimidation, and the woman who said no." Claire agreed with one condition. "You tell it all. Even the parts that scare people." Tanya promised she would. The cameras rolled the next morning, capturing Claire walking through the burned rig site, standing in front of the hatch, opening the Bible with the photo inside. She spoke calmly, directly. "This land was abandoned because people were told to fear it. I feared it too, but I also listened. And when land speaks, you don't ignore it. You fight for it." That same night, Eli came into her room, holding a small square object. "I found this by the swing set," he said. "It's a SIM card." Claire took it, confused. There was no phone nearby, no packaging, no tracks in the dirt. She gave it to Marley, who plugged it into a card reader and loaded the data onto her laptop. Inside, 7 audio files and 2 video clips. The audio recordings were phone calls, government-style encryption, scrambled voices discussing containment leaks, legacy sites, and reactivation protocols. The video clips were worse. One showed a subterranean tunnel, camera panning across a hallway lined with labeled doors. Each door bore a name: Corpus Ridge, Dust Hollow, Widow's Ridge. The second clip ended with the camera turning to face the person holding it. It was Amos Dunn, his face older, more sunken, but unmistakable. He spoke into the lens. "If you're watching this, it means I failed. I couldn't stop them, but maybe you can." Then static. Claire sat in silence. The man she'd once dismissed as a rambling old ghost had been part of something far deeper than she'd understood. She turned to James and Marley. "Do we release it all?" Marley hesitated. "Once it's out, there's no turning back. They'll escalate." Claire nodded slowly. "Then let them." The next morning, #Widow's Ridge trended on Twitter. National press picked up the story. 3 environmental organizations issued statements of support. Former oil workers emailed anonymous tips. A documentary filmmaker from New York offered funding for a full investigation. But most important of all, a junior senator from Texas called. Personally, he wanted to visit the ranch. Claire agreed. They would show him everything, even Vault B. The knock on Claire's door didn't come at night. It came at exactly 10 a.m., in full daylight, with 3 black Suburbans parked just outside the property line and a drone circling discreetly above the barn like a hawk, trained for surveillance. Standing at the threshold was Senator Rafael Moreno, the junior U.S. Senator from Texas. He wasn't what Claire expected. No entourage, no overpolished smile. He wore jeans, a white shirt, and dust-stained boots that looked like they'd known more than one cattle auction. His handshake was firm, his eyes tired, and his words to the point. "I've read the reports, seen the footage, and I don't like what I'm seeing." Claire nodded once. "Then welcome to Widow's Ridge." They walked the property together, trailed only by his aide and Marley. The senator studied everything: the burn marks near the derrick, the makeshift drilling site, the remnants of the hatch Claire had bolted shut. At every point, he asked questions that revealed he already knew the answers. He wasn't gathering intel, he was verifying it. When they reached the barn, Claire paused. "There's something I need to show you," she said. "But once you see it, you don't get to unknow it." Moreno gave her a long look. "Show me." Claire pried open the rotted floorboards behind the feed bins. Beneath them, concealed by hay bales and a cut of canvas, was a trapdoor, vault-like, circular, lined with concrete. A single brass plate on the edge read, "Vault B, 1951. She held up the key Amos Dunn had left her. With a click, the hatch unlocked. The senator stepped back. "I'll go first," Claire said. She descended slowly, flashlight in hand. The air below was colder than it should have been, metallic and dry. The staircase spiraled down farther than she'd imagined, at least 3 full stories. When she reached the bottom, the light caught the edge of a hallway sealed behind a vault door. She turned the wheel. It groaned, then gave. Inside were crates, stamped with Department of Energy insignias. File cabinets bolted to the floor, a map mounted to the wall, showing 6 red-marked regions across Texas, all labeled dormant, no access, without clearance. Moreno stepped inside. He didn't speak for a full minute. Then he whispered, "They've been sitting on this for decades." Claire opened one of the crates. Inside, schematics, patents, and early drill formation logs bearing the Blackstone logo, dated 1949, well before the company had ever gone public. "This isn't just about oil," Moreno muttered. "This is about suppression of sovereign land." By nightfall, everything had changed. The senator's visit made headlines. Photos of him with Claire near the rig site were broadcast nationwide. His press secretary released a statement. "Senator Moreno has initiated a preliminary inquiry into historical resource concealment and property intimidation on U.S. soil." Blackstone denied everything. They issued a sterile press release claiming no involvement, no ownership of Widow's Ridge, and no knowledge of Vault B. But it was too late. Claire's name was no longer just trending. It was being cited in committee memos. That same night, a manila envelope appeared on Claire's porch. Inside, handwritten notes from Amos Dunn, pages torn from a leather-bound journal. Each note corresponded to a different site marked on the Vault B map. They told of other landowners, other accidents, other families who had fought and vanished. One note described a man in Corpus Ridge who struck gas and was never seen again. Another mentioned a woman in Dust Hollow who filed a mineral claim and was relocated for national security. At the bottom of the last page, Amos had written in shaky cursive, "They lied to all of us, but we left the truth in the ground, and truth doesn't rot." Claire met Marley and James in the kitchen. They read the letters in silence. None of them spoke until the final page. James finally broke the quiet. "You realize what this is, right? If we go public with this, they'll come harder. This time with lawyers and lobbyists and whatever else they got." Marley added, "Or they'll buy silence from Congress. It's happened before." Claire looked at them both. Her voice didn't waver. "Then we make it louder than they can bury." That weekend, Tanya Greer returned with her team. They set up a full broadcast unit in the barn and prepared a live press briefing to air across digital channels. Marley released every document from Vault B, along with Amos's journal scans and the SIM card data, onto a protected site hosted offshore. Claire, wearing the same denim shirt she had during the first interview, stood again in front of the camera. Not just a mother now, not just a landowner, but something more. A witness, a resistor, and a voice that refused to be bought. "I'm not a geologist. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a mother who paid $700 for a piece of dirt no one wanted. And underneath it, I found what no one was supposed to see." The feed cut across the internet like wildfire. Politicians tweeted statements. Talk shows debated land rights. Energy firms issued emergency shareholder calls, and a single photo of Claire standing in front of Vault B made the front page of the New York Times. That night, Eli stood beside her at the edge of the ridge, looking out at the stars. "Do you think they'll take it away?" he asked. Claire thought for a moment. "They can try, but the world knows now." She knelt beside him and whispered something she hadn't said aloud in years. "This land didn't just give us a second chance. It gave us a fight worth showing up for. And tomorrow, Washington would be showing up too." The deeper they dug, the quieter the earth seemed to grow, as if the land itself were holding its breath. For days after the senator's visit, reporters continued circling. State officials made calls. Claire couldn't return fast enough, and the public story swelled beyond control. But even amid that noise, Claire's focus tunneled into one direction, down. Not metaphorically, but physically, toward whatever secrets remained sealed beneath Vault B. The night after the live broadcast, James returned with an industrial-grade jack he'd borrowed from a cattle processing plant outside San Angelo. Marley had sourced a battery-powered drill and a camera scope from a university tech contact. They weren't engineers or archaeologists, but they were determined. The plan was simple: get past the second chamber. Claire led the way into the vault with a calm steadiness that felt entirely foreign to her old life. The woman who once cried over bounced checks and broken plumbing now knelt calmly before a 12-inch thick steel door like a surgeon before the first cut. James placed the jack beneath the hinge. "Ready when you are," he said. Claire nodded. With a slow, grinding pop, the inner door gave way. Behind it stretched a concrete tunnel, no wider than a horse stall, and lit only by emergency bulbs, long dead. The walls were lined with bolts, like something meant to withstand pressure. Along the ceiling, rusted copper pipes trailed into blackness, connected to valve systems marked in white stencil. Crude exchange, Zone 4. Emergency drain, Zone 3. "Drain what?" Marley whispered. Nobody answered. 50 feet in, the tunnel opened into a subterranean chamber, round and cathedral-like, with 6 steel cabinets bolted into the stone floor in a hexagonal pattern. At the center, a steel podium with a keypad and biometric scanner, long since deactivated. Claire moved slowly. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in seconds. Each cabinet bore a plate, tarnished with age: Corpus Ridge, Dust Hollow, Widow's Ridge, Delta Fork, Brimstone Well, Rockfield Slope. Marley spoke first. "These are the other sites. This is the center point." James opened the cabinet marked Widow's Ridge. Inside were documents sealed in vacuum glass, geological maps, legal memos, and a 1946 memo from the Department of the Interior stamped in red: "Eyes only. Energy Suppression Act, classified per section." 14.2. He pulled out a single document. Claire read over his shoulder. It was a transcript. "If the public becomes aware of the strata's true potential, mass land disputes will ensue. Blackstone will act as custodian. No direct drilling, no extraction. Maintain narrative of dry soil and insufficient yield." Claire took a step back, breath shallow. So, they knew. All along. In the second cabinet, Dust Hollow, Marley found something else: a list of names. Handwritten. Faded. Beside each name was a red stamp: deceased, relocated, deemed threat, neutralized. Halfway down the list: Amos Dunn, contained, status, obsolete. Claire felt something collapse inside her. Rage, sorrow, disbelief, all collapsing inward. "He tried to stop them," she whispered, "and they erased him for it." James opened the final cabinet. Inside was a video reel, a sealed envelope, and a set of blueprints rolled into a black cylinder. Marley unraveled the blueprints on the vault floor, sweeping dust aside. It wasn't a diagram of oil flow or land grids. It was a containment system, a network of deep-buried control valves and pressure gates designed not to extract oil, but to reroute and keep it buried. Claire stared, voice tight. "They weren't just hiding the oil. They were keeping it from us. On purpose." Marley added, "And they built a system so airtight, even geological surveys would report false negatives. Every landowner who tried to drill here would hit nothing. unless they knew the sequence. Back at the house, they began scanning every document, uploading everything to the protected database Tanya had set up. Marley had also connected with an anonymous source inside the Energy Oversight Commission, someone who confirmed that Vault B's existence had been denied on federal records since 1984. Claire drafted a single-page letter. I am not an enemy of the state. I am a mother, a citizen, and the legal owner of this land. I will not be silenced. The truth beneath my feet belongs to every person who's ever been told they weren't powerful enough to ask why. She sent it to the press, congressional representatives, and every major outlet in the country. Within hours, the reactions began. A congressional subcommittee issued a request for investigation into Blackstone Holdings and its subsidiaries. Claire was subpoenaed to speak before a joint energy and ethics panel. Her inbox exploded with messages, landowners from across the South recounting similar threats, similar rumors, similar vanishing acts. But the most unexpected message came late that night. It was an email. No subject line, no sender. Just a single sentence. You've gone too far. Stop before the land stops you. Marley traced the server. It pinged from a federal building in D.C. At sunrise, Claire walked alone to the ridge. The soil beneath her boots was no longer something she feared. It was something she understood. Something sacred. The kind of sacred that doesn't need a pulpit or a preacher. Just memory and silence. She crouched down, pressed her palm into the earth, and whispered, "You've been waiting to be heard. And now, they can't unhear you." From behind, Eli's voice broke the silence. "Mom?" She turned. He pointed to the edge of the pasture. A construction crew was arriving, but not from Blackstone, from the Department of Energy. They weren't armed, they were watching. Claire stood. The story wasn't over, but the truth was no longer buried. The morning the investigation began, the wind on Widow's Ridge didn't howl, it sang. It carried the scent of upturned earth, of grease and ash, but also something cleaner, like renewal. After months of digging, resisting, and holding her ground, Claire stood with her children on the edge of the property as a convoy of marked vehicles rolled through the rusted gate. No more unmarked Suburbans, no more veiled threats. These were federal inspectors, environmental engineers, and legal auditors. Some were skeptical, some were scared, but they were here, and that, at long last, meant someone was listening. 3 days later, a preliminary report from the Department of Energy confirmed it. Beneath Claire Maddox's land rested an untapped oil formation worth over $1.2 billion. The reserve, long suppressed by engineered falsification and land manipulation, was part of a wider cover-up involving at least 5 other sites across Texas. Vault B and its contents were authenticated as government property improperly transferred to a corporate holding shell in 1951. Claire's name was cleared, her claim upheld, and for the first time since she'd signed that $700 deed, she felt the soil beneath her feet as hers, not just legally, but spiritually. Blackstone Holdings collapsed within a month. Shareholders abandoned ship. Investigative journalists uncovered layers of fraud and illegal surveillance stretching back decades. A congressional hearing aired footage from Claire's underground vault, including the names of landowners targeted under containment protocols. No one could deny it anymore. Senator Rafael Moreno introduced the Landowners' Sovereignty and Transparency Act, built on Claire's testimony. Marley helped draft the bill, and Claire sat behind her as it passed with bipartisan support. Justice, for once, didn't come too late. But Claire didn't sell. Not for $4 million, not for $40 million. She could have taken the check, vanished into anonymity, bought her kids a future far from any fight. But something deeper anchored her now, something older than money. Instead, she formed the Widow's Ridge Cooperative Trust, a non-profit collective that offered fractional mineral royalties to local families, built sustainable infrastructure, and partnered with universities to oversee clean drilling practices. The first well they drilled, they named Amos 1. The second, Eli's Hope. And beside them, a wind turbine rose, tall and slow-turning, humming not with secrets, but with promise. The diner that once fired Claire rehired her, this time as a consultant for their community development board. James, after months of healing and checkups, took a part-time position training young drill engineers. And Marley? She passed the bar and became the face of land justice law across the South, her TED Talk about Widow's Ridge reaching millions. As for Claire, she stayed home. Every morning, she walked her land with bare feet in the grass and mud, not to check the rigs, not to worry about claims or paperwork, just to remember what it meant to stand on something no one could take from her again. The final ceremony was small, no cameras, no speeches, just Claire, Eli, and Sadie planting a prairie willow beside the rebuilt barn. The plaque at its base read, "This land gave us a second chance. May it give others one, too." As the wind rolled through the open field, Eli asked, "Do you think it's really over?" Claire looked out toward the sun, now rising behind the windmill and the slow, churning derrick. "No," she said softly, "but I think we get to decide what comes next." Sadie, now taller and louder, and no longer afraid of creaking floorboards or strangers in black cars, pressed her hand into the soil. "I think it's beautiful now." Claire smiled. It was, and always had been.